Well, here we are, it's Friday afternoon, and where else would you be except at Portsmouth Live TV? Of course, if the sun was shining, you might be on the beach, but of course, you're all staying in to watch Adrian and I. And we're now joined by Gavin Meikle, and we're going to be talking about being a Toastmaster, public speaking, the Solent speakers, because there is a commercial aspect to this too, but there's also the part which is training people to do public speaking, but also to overcome perhaps obstacles like lack of self-esteem and also lack of confidence, etc. So where did you start with your public speaking?
I started at school, I have to say. Back up in Scotland, my school had a literary and debating society.
Yep.
I got involved in that with debating. Terrified me, I have to say, when I first started. But as it got on, I quite enjoyed the adversarial aspect of it. And we just did that with our classmates. We had a good English teacher who really encouraged us.
And Solent speakers, how did that start? How did that come about and when?
Solent speakers started up in early in I think 2001, 2002. One of our members was originally a Toastmaster with Arran speakers in Chichester. There was no club in the Fair and Portsmouth area, so he thought, well, I'll start up a club. He lived in Portchester, and so started up the club in the Lycees Hotel.
Well, you're affiliated to Toastmasters International. So let's talk about Toastmasters International, because I think most of us are familiar with the sort of the large dinner, the corporate dinner, where you have a Toastmaster who says, please be seated or stand, etc. Do you do any of that too?
We don't. It's one of these historical things that when the organisation was set up in the 1920s, the chap who set it up, Walter Smedley, he set it up as he called it Toastmasters. In reality, it's all about public speaking skills.
Right.
There is an element of emceeing it. Each meeting we have a Toastmaster who runs the meeting.
Okay, right.
But we don't get into red coats and all that kind of thing.
And you're a non-profit making organisation, I understand. You're just in it for the benefit of learning and the benefit of keeping up appearances, I suppose, and keeping in check with what you do.
It started really because Walter realised that he was a member of the YMCA at the time, and realised there were a lot of young men at that time who were going through joblessness, who needed the confidence and the communication skills and the leadership skills to be able to get a job and progress their career. And that's how he started up, with just one little club in America. And then it started to blossom from there through America and then into the rest of the world.
And there's an awful lot of people who naturally are shy about not just talking publicly, but talking perhaps in a one-to-one situation. I mean, people think about public speaking, but in actual fact, it can be as intimate as that, can't it? In a job interview.
Absolutely.
Or a situation like that.
The skills are very transferable. Some people find it's okay one-to-one, but the bigger audience just scares the living daylights out of them. But a lot of people, we've got some people who started off really quite quiet, quite shy individuals, and they managed to pluck up the courage to come along and meet us and start to find out what we did and how it worked. And it's a joy just to see people who 6 months, a year, 2 years ago, depending on their, started off hardly saying a word and sitting in the corner, who now take on roles and give speeches.
Sounds excellent.
We were like that at one point.
We were actually, yes, we very much were.
Yeah.
Just, I wonder if you could just run us through a typical evening. If we went along to Solent Toastmasters, give us a typical evening and what we'd expect.
Well, we normally start 7:15 for 7:30, so people come along. There's a bit of networking and welcoming. At 7:30 we start the meeting. We have a bit of a warm-up. We get everybody just to say a few words for 15 seconds just to get the people warmed up. Then we normally have 3 or 4 prepared speeches. These are members who are working through a series of assignments at their own pace, and they volunteer that they're going to do a maybe 7-minute speech that night. Every speech is then assigned an evaluator. So during that speech, somebody's sitting, observing them, writing down notes.
No pressure then?
Not really, but the nice thing is that they know that evaluation is done very much from a point of view of encouragement and support. So it's about what people did well and what they could do to make it even better. You don't tend to go off, oh, well, that was fine, but you had a habit of doing this. So we have those. The first half of the meeting is really the prepared speeches and the warm-up. After the break, we have a small networking break, give people a chance to chat, and then we have the evaluators stand up and give their verbal presentation, and they do a written one as well. And then the last part of the evening, we do what's called table topics, which is one of the things that it's about impromptu speaking. So it's one thing, some people love it, some people hate it, but we have a table topics master for the night who will choose a theme or a series of topics. And they'll literally read out a topic and invite somebody from the audience to come up and speak. And they can say, no, I don't want to do it, or pass if I want to. But they speak for maybe 1.5, 2 minutes on that topic. And the aim is to try and speak, intelligently or wittily or just fluently. And they learn from that experience with feedback. What are the tricks of the trade? What are the things that even when we're asked to speak in off the cuff, which happens all the time. If you're at work and suddenly somebody says, you're in a meeting, could you give us a report on that project? Oh my God, suddenly got to do it. You've got to organise your thinking. But there are tools and formulas, if you like, that help you organise your thinking so that you come across convincingly and confidently.
Well, I was looking at your websites. I'm looking both Toastmasters International and also Solent Speakers. Yeah. And there are some useful tips there, perhaps, without giving too much away, because obviously we want people to come to your meetings. Surely. But perhaps we could start with some top tips that perhaps you could give somebody.
Well, I think the first top tip I always think is practice is key.
Yes.
You can read all the books you want, you can watch videos on it, but really the skill comes from practice, and it's finding somewhere that you can practice, whether it's at home or with your friends, or at work if you've got that opportunity, or somewhere like Solent Speakers where you come along to a supporting environment and you practice it. There's no substitute for practice, and there's then the second part of that about getting feedback, getting somebody who you know will give you constructive feedback. It's all very well somebody say, well, that was great. That's nice, it gives you a nice warm feeling, but well, what was it that was great and how do I improve? Yeah. People need to say, well, what I loved was your eye contact or your tone of voice or your energy or your facial expression or the structure of your speech and so on. So finding somebody to give you great feedback. I think the third thing is to think about or remember that the audience generally want you to do well.
Yes.
They're sitting there going, there but for the grace of God go I. They can feel potentially the nerves, and therefore they're on your side most of the time, even in a business situation. There's not many of us who sit there going, I really want to be bored today. I really want to see somebody who
well, they wouldn't be there in the first place, would they?
I read that in a book once to watch out for that, because obviously, watch out for the hecklers and have a good retort to come back with.
And it's also the glazed look.
But that's the other thing, you've got to watch out for the glazed look very much. I found when I was, the last time I did one, and I had to give about 10 or 15 minutes, and I found the easiest way was write it out as a script. Yeah. Don't write it down as you would expect to read it, write it as you would say it. Yeah. And then I recorded it, and I played it back in the car everywhere I went, and I was so that I was off pat with it. Yeah. And then if you needed to throw an ad-lib in, you could, but you actually put your jokes or your comedy, your humour, actually into the thing as you're going along. I failed miserably, by the way.
But humour is such an important part of it, isn't it? I mean, people assume that even in a business environment that you need to have keep it very serious. But in fact, it's often to start it off is to keep it lighthearted and to finish on a lighter note. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's about provoking an emotional response in some ways, and humour is one of the ways of doing that. The thing is, it is a challenge. You know, some people say, right, I'll get humour in, therefore I'll tell a joke. But you've got to be careful, because
it's got to be a pertinent one, hasn't it?
If it's one, choosing the joke that is relevant to the audience.
Yes.
And
well, that's one thing I found difficult, is to try and find the right jokes.
And some people are naturally good comedians, and they've got the timing and they've got the pattern. Other people struggle, and I usually say to people, it's better if you're not a natural joke teller, then avoid jokes.
Yes.
But think about humorous situations, maybe self-deprecating humour about something that's happened to you, that you can poke a little bit of fun of yourself, and the audience can identify with that.
It's the identification that actually makes it work, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, neither Adrian and I, and we say this constantly, we're neither of us are sort of the BBC stereotype of a TV presenter. Sure. I mean, we both come from radio backgrounds, so here we are. I've done some TV, but I was about 3 stone lighter at the time. But what we have maintained is that it's about reality. But a lot of people do bring in that element, don't they? Oh, I couldn't possibly stand up and talk to people because I don't look the part. Yes. And they do take that into account. And it's very difficult then. A, I'm shy, but also I feel I don't look right. Very difficult.
And I think, again, people are like, I have to try and be something else that other people expect. You know, they see somebody who's a really dynamic, big, bold speaker, and they think, I could never be like that. Yeah. But if you think of, I always give the example of Steve Jobs from Apple, Chief Executive of Apple. If you ever see any videos of him, he's very calm, he's very quiet, he's very measured presenter. He's not the most exciting guy in the world, but he presents really effectively, really clearly. You look at his opposite number from Microsoft, Steve Ballmer, and he's a high energy, in-your-face, kind of real American presenter. Yes. And so what they do is they're playing to their own strengths. They're being authentic, I think. They're being honest. And just because you may be a little bit quieter, you can be just as good a presenter, just as good a communicator. as somebody who is more extrovert.
Somebody said to me as well before I went out and did a few of these, always turn up early so that you can actually recognise, the people recognise you to know that when you stand up you are the speaker. To make sure that you're introduced properly so people know who the heck you are and you're not just a waiter.
It all depends what sort of suit you're wearing. Yes.
And the other one was always go to the bathroom beforehand.
Yes.
And apart from do what you've got to do in the bathroom is to look in the mirror and just make sure that everything's right.
Yeah.
Because when you stand up, if your ties will skew if and you've got spinach in your teeth and anything like that, you just look completely ridiculous.
Exactly.
The most interesting public speaking I ever did was at 6 o'clock on a very wet morning on the back of a lorry talking to 300 Irish navvies who were just about to go out, and I was Director of Customer Services at the time in London, and we were digging holes in the ground, and we had numerous complaints about builder's bum, throwing dirt over petunias and all sorts of things. And so I'll come and they were all out and they stood there like this. Well, I'm part Irish because I had to stand there, and I have never ever been so intimidated in my life. So I told an Irish joke. Yeah. And I thought, it's either going to one night I'm going to be lynched or no. But I mean, there can be some very intimidating circumstances.
I find most of the time it's the audience are with you, I think, and most of the situations most people are in. And if you focus on the fact, the other thing is that you're the only one that knows what you're going to say. So the audience don't know if you miss a bit out or you forget something, because they haven't seen your script. But people can be so hard on themselves, and it's one of these things. I think people we tend to be harsh, and therefore we come off and go, oh, I didn't do that well, I forgot to say this, I forgot to say this. They forget that actually 80% of it was damn good. And also people at least be a kind of equal opportunities person for yourself that recognise the flaws and what you need to do, but recognise what you're already good at and that you managed to get through it and that you covered 80% of the material, and maybe people came up and said that was really great, or they asked you the appropriate questions afterwards.
The other thing, of course, is if you do forget something early on, is not to go back and cover it because it's out of context and it's out of synchronisation as to where it's the timeline is all wrong.
And generally,
so just leave it.
Don't apologise if you miss something out. Don't draw attention to it, because just pause for a second or two. Take a glass of water, gather your thoughts, and then move on to the next part.
Well, on that point, we, I'm afraid, have come to the end of this particular segment, so it is appropriate now to ask you. We have, in fact, put your website under your name, and it's in the credits, but perhaps you'd like to give it to everybody so that they know where they can come, especially if they've got a wedding coming up, perhaps they're a best man, or they've got to give a talk, a presentation, and they can come to you. Is there a charge for them at the meetings?
You can come to 3 meetings free of charge, completely. Membership normally with Solent Speakers is £84, I think it is, if I remember, for the year. We play twice a year, so it's not a lot of money for what you get.
No.
You get a magazine every month, plus you get all the meetings. You don't pay anything else at the Lycée Hotel in Fareham. We meet on the first and third Tuesdays of every month at 7:15.
Right.
And the website is www.solent-speakers.org.uk.
That came up